Hi, I'm John Guandolo, President and founder of Understanding the Threat, and I want to begin by simply asking a question. Why did 9/11 happen? First, let's begin with what our government told us about the reasons for the United States being attacked on September 11, 2001. We're told by our government that the people attacking us suffer from economic deprivation. We're told that they hate us because of our foreign policy. They hate us because of our relationship with Israel. They hate us because they don't have enough money, so they're jealous of our economic status. Is that why we were attacked on 9/11? And is that why there have been over 70 jihadi attacks in the United States since 9/11? Here you have Quran 68:4, and thou standest on an exalted standard of character, speaking about Muhammad. And Quran 33:21 is even more clear. Ye have indeed in the messenger of Allah a beautiful pattern of conduct for anyone, any Muslim, whose hope is in Allah. So the command from Allah, the message from Allah, is that Muhammad is an exalted standard of conduct for all Muslims for all times. So let's look, as we're telling this story, what are some of the things, some of the behaviors that we see in authoritative Islam that they teach about Muhammad? Well, here is, you can see on the screen here, the life of Muhammad, the Sirat Rasulullah, the authoritative biography of Islam's Prophet Muhammad. And here we have on page 464, this story right here. Then he, Muhammad, sent for them, the Jews, and struck off their heads in the trenches as they were brought out to him in batches. There were 600 or 700 in all, though some of them put the figure as high as 800 or 900. So the most perfect example of a human being in Islam, Muhammad, killed up to 900 Jews after the Battle of the Trench. Muhammad asks, who will rid me of Marwan's daughter? Because Marwan's daughter had mocked the Prophet. And what happens is a Muslim kills Marwan's daughter, and in the morning, Muhammad, in response to Marwan's daughter being killed, says 2 goats won't even butt their heads about this. Who cares? So when Muslims, following in the perfect example, for instance, go to Charlie Hebdo's headquarters in France and kill people for making cartoons about the Prophet Muhammad, that's lawful in Islam because the Prophet did it. He approved that behavior. When 2 Muslims from the Muslim Brotherhood's Islamic Community Center of Phoenix drive to Garland, Texas, because there is a Draw Muhammad cartoon contest going on, and attack this event, they're doing that in the perfect example of Muhammad, who condoned this behavior. Sound Bukhari hadith about what Muhammad said and did is at the highest level of Islamic authoritative hadith. Now, a hadith is simply a report of something the Prophet Muhammad said and did, according to Islam. And this is what the scholars say about sound Bukhari hadith. All Muslim scholars are agreed that Sahih Bukhari is the most authentic and reliable book after the Book of Allah. So the scholars in Islam say that Bukhari's hadith rises to the level of the authority just below the Quran, the direct word of God, according to Islam. So let's see what Bukhari attributes to Islam's Prophet Muhammad. Allah's messenger said, the hour will not be established until you fight the Jews, and the stone behind which a Jew will be hiding will say, O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me, so kill him. So this is why we have a sheikh in Garland, Texas, for instance, who teaches that all Jews must be killed. He teaches that in the Islamic Community Center of Garland, Texas. And why wouldn't he? This is the perfect example, as demonstrated to all people, according to Islam, through the Prophet Muhammad's actions. This is what Muhammad said. It's authoritative. Here's another one. Aisha, Muhammad's 6-year-old bride, narrates this hadith recorded by Bukhari. The Prophet Muhammad married Aisha when she was 6 years old, and he consummated his marriage when she was 9 years old. And then she remained with him for 9 years till his death. So in the most authoritative report about something Muhammad said, his 6-year-old child bride said, yes, he married me when I was 6, and we consummated the relationship when she was 9. When you see Muslim men who are 65 years old marrying 8-year-old girls in Jordan and in Syria and in other parts of the world, they're doing that lawfully under Islam. And by the way, that is going on in the United States. Here you have Muhammad himself, as recorded by Bukhari, saying, I, Muhammad, have been ordered to fight them, the non-Muslims, until they testify that there is no God but Allah, Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. So Muhammad says, I have been commanded to fight, and Allah has commanded all of us to wage war against the non-Muslims until Allah's divine law, sharia, is imposed on the earth. So then what is Muhammad's biography reflect or record that Muhammad did? Let's just look at the table of contents of his biography. We see raid after raid after raid, battle, fighting, the spoils of war, raids, attacks, killing certain individuals, more battles, more raids, more attacks, more expeditions. And this is how the Prophet Muhammad lived. So the guy that Islam says is the most perfect man, the exalted standard of conduct for all Muslims for all times, said, God has commanded us to fight the non-Muslims until Allah's law is the law of the land. And then his history is littered with battles that he directly participated in. And as I shared before, he participated in beheading up to 900 Jews after the Battle of the Trench. So this is behavior that is good for all times. The record also reflects Muhammad allowed for the taking of sex slaves, for torture, and all of these things. So this becomes the example for all Muslims. So when Muhammad dies in 632, what do we see his followers do? Well, we see them go out and capture and conquer Jerusalem in 637 AD. And then they continue with unprovoked attacks on the non-Muslim world for 470 years until finally in 1095, Pope Urban II, at the request of those in the West, declares a crusade, and the West begins its first actual attack to defend itself against the unprovoked attacks of the Muslim world. That's the historical record. Now, a lot of people are confused about the Crusades, so what I'd like to do is take you back to 622. I'm going to use this battle map, thanks to my good friend Bill Warner, and I'm going to show you all of the battles, over 500 jihadi battles from 622 all the way forward in history, and then we are going to look at the Crusade battles, and we'll see if there's a difference. So let's look at this video. So what did we see? We saw from 622 to the 1900s, battle after battle for centuries. And when we look at what the Crusades were, we see that in actuality, the Crusades lasted less than 2 centuries. So what do we see? Well, Muhammad dies in 632. In 100 years, the Muslims end up in Tours, France, 100 years from the Arabian Peninsula to the Battle of Tours in France, a critical battle. Why? Because the Muslims are pressing hard into Europe, and thanks to Charles the Hammer Martel, the Muslims are defeated, and it's a significant defeat for them. And the good news is that Europe staved that off. The history in Spain is that in 711 AD, the Muslims conquered Spain. And does anybody know how long Spain was conquered? 781 years. And so the Spaniards, who were up in the mountains, training, preparing for centuries, occasionally battles in Spain against the Muslims. But finally, the Reconquista, they came down out of the mountains and defeated the Muslims. And what year was that? 1492. And the king and queen of Spain launched Columbus to find new trade routes because the Muslims were controlling all the trade routes. Interesting piece of history that we don't teach in U.S. public schools. But of course, that led to the founding of the Americas. This significant battle in 1571, the Battle of Lepanto, the Holy League's fleet, a composite military, a composite fleet under sail, going against the Ottoman Empire's naval fleet, which was under oar. What's interesting is the fleet prayed before this battle. The leadership went around ship to ship and they prayed the rosary prior to this battle. While in Europe, the Europeans were praying because they realized if this battle were lost, again, Europe would be in grave danger. Well, miraculously, and I encourage you all to actually read about the Battle of Lepanto, the Holy League defeated the Turkish naval forces. But in 1683, September 11th and September 12th, 1683, the Muslims were back at the gates of Vienna. And thanks to Poland, the Polish hussars, these, as you see in this picture, these cavalry troops with these huge wings that they would wear to intimidate their enemy, they defeated the Muslims at the gates of Vienna, which was the last major clash between the Muslims and the Western forces, at least up until the modern times. Well, the story continues because in 1786, U.S. ambassadors Thomas Jefferson and John Adams meet with the ambassador from Tripoli to the United Kingdom, to Great Britain. And they ask him, why are you seizing U.S. ships, and why are you kidnapping American citizens and holding them for ransom, for tribute? At the time, the United States government was paying a quarter of our national income to Muslim nations for tribute. Well, the ambassador to Great Britain from Tripoli answered Adams and Jefferson as to why, and they recorded his response in a letter to the Continental Congress, which is today obviously kept in the Library of Congress. And Jefferson and Adams said this: Islam was founded on the laws of their prophet, that it was written in their Quran that all nations who should not have acknowledged their authority were sinners, that it was their right and duty to make war upon them wherever they could be found, and to make slaves of all they could take as prisoners, and that every Muslim who should be slain in battle was sure to go to paradise. This is what this Muslim told Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, which is interesting because this is exactly what Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State and Hezbollah and Hamas and Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram and Islamic Jihad and all the other jihadi groups tell us the reason that they're fighting today. So our founders had direct contact with this. And what's interesting is the first war America fought after the American Revolution was against who? The Muslims. 1804, Thomas Jefferson sent the Marines into Tripoli, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli in the Marines' hymn. And being a Marine, this is very powerful because America's first war after the Revolution was against Muslims, and we stopped paying them tribute. And by the way, why do we have a standing Navy in our Constitution? Why do we have letters of marque that authorize private citizens to fight on behalf of the United States? Because of the Muslims, because they were seizing our ships on the seas and capturing our citizens. But the history doesn't end there. As the Ottoman Empire, the Islamic Caliphate that existed from the 1230s, enters into the early 1900s, they side with the Germans in World War I. They're on the losing side. And after World War I and the Turkish Revolution, a man named Mustafa Kemal who's a national hero, becomes the founder of the new nation state Turkey. And what does he do? He dissolves the approximately 700-year-old caliphate, the Ottoman Empire, dissolves it, does away with sharia, Islamic law. He outlaws, to be clear, the growing of the Islamic beard, the Sunnah beard, like the Prophet Mohammad grew. He outlaws the wearing of a hijab and the burqa. He outlaws the call to prayer out loud by the muezzins. He builds a secular army to defend secular Turkey. And how do you think this went over? Not real well. And so in Egypt, the son of a prominent imam, Hassan al-Banna, creates the Ikhwan, the Society of Muslim Brothers, the Muslim Brotherhood. To do what? To reestablish the Islamic Caliphate. And so the Muslim Brotherhood's own bylaws say, we exist to establish the law's law in the land and establish an Islamic State. Not that complicated. It doesn't end in the 1920s. In the 1930s, Saudi Arabia discovers oil, and they start to get it out of the ground with the help of the United States, Britain. And what do we see? 1948, the State of Israel is born. And immediately what happens? The Muslim world goes to war, the 1948 war against the Israelis. We see in 1948 something else happen. The Prime Minister of Egypt is killed by the Muslim Brotherhood. And the following year, 1949, Egyptian security services kill the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna. Well, let me go back to what I just said. In 1938, oil is discovered in Saudi Arabia. And by 1950, the Trans-Arabian Pipeline is completed, taking oil all the way out to the coast, to Lebanon, and points in between. So Saudi Arabia begins building a war chest. They begin making millions and then billions of dollars. And so what does Islamic law have to say about waging war, about jihad? The law of jihad says you must wage jihad when you have the resources and the ability to do so. We see Saudi Arabia is starting to spread the information, building schools. We start to see hijackings and a number of attacks. And let's walk through some of these. We see 1967, the Six-Day War. Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq at war with Israel. And Israel defeats them. As a matter of fact, Israel obliterates Egypt's entire air force. And total victory. And then what do we see? 1972 at the Munich Olympics. Black September, a Muslim jihadi organization, kills Israeli athletes. And by the way, as a sidebar, the grandson of one of those terrorists ran for U.S. Congress in the 2018 election cycle, representing one of the districts in California. What do we see after the 72 Olympics? Well, we see the October 73 Yom Kippur War. Again, from October 6th to October 25th, in massive tank battles. And again, the Israelis with significantly less tanks, less manpower, and somehow they are victorious in this war. And what do we continue to see in the 1970s? Well, November 4th, 1979, in Iran, jihadis take over the U.S. Embassy and end up holding them for 444 days. And the Ayatollah Khomeini declares a global jihad against the entire world. And what happens the next month, December 1979? The Soviet Union invades Afghanistan, which becomes a rallying point for jihadis from around the world. And Al-Qaeda in the United States sets up Al-Qifa refugee centers all over the United States to raise funds for the jihadis in Afghanistan. Well, that's not the end of the story, because in 1981, Anwar Sadat, who negotiated with the Muslim Brotherhood and released a number of them from prison, ends up getting assassinated by them October 6th, 1981, during a public parade. Well, what do we continue to see? 1983, October, the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon is attacked. October 23rd, 1983, the Marine barracks in Lebanon are destroyed. This is an Iranian, a Hezbollah operation. Hezbollah, of course, being an arm of the Iranian government. And they have yet to pay a price for this. Over 200 Marines killed and many more wounded. And of course, what do we see in the 1970s and the 1980s? Numerous hijackings. We see CIA station chiefs being kidnapped and executed, held for ransom. All of these events. And what are we actually seeing? We are seeing a continuum of jihad from 622 to the 1970s and 80s. But folks, it does not end there. Because what do we also see? Well, let me play you this video from 1989. I'm just going to go ahead and let it play, and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
And while our objective, our final objective, is not just to become part of the system that we experience now and that we see, our objective, our final objective, is to create our own Islamic systems, and not only create Islamic systems for Muslims, but to look at all the other people who are sharing this country with us. And in that long-range process of making America Muslim, all of America Muslim, then we have to have some actual short-range goals. We have to have some way of dealing with them and know how we're going to deal with them and in which ways, and be very calculated about it, or else we will not accomplish our goals.
So what do you think of that video? Here you have a woman talking about we have to be very, what? Intentional, very thoughtful. They're conniving. They're strategically thinking about this, bringing down the United States and making all of America Muslim. Then what do we see? 1993, Khartoum, Sudan. The popular Arab Islamic Conference. And who's there? Everybody's there. It's like all of the mafia families coming together for one huge conference. Osama bin Laden is there. Imad Mughniya, the leading bomber for Hezbollah, is there, as well as other Hezbollah leaders, Hamas leaders, other Islamic jihadi organizations from around the world. It is a who's who in the jihadi world. And they discuss strategically the direction they're going. And what do we see? We see attacks that are taking place, continuing in the United States and Europe. We have the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, 1996 Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia attacked, 19 U.S. Air Force airmen killed. That is a Hezbollah Iranian operation. 1998, 2 U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania attacked by al-Qaeda operatives. It's an al-Qaeda operation, but again, it doesn't matter what the group is. They are all jihadis waging jihad to establish an Islamic State under Sharia, to strike terror into the hearts of the unbelievers, as the Quran says. Then what? Well, we have 1999, the end of 1999, numerous millennial plots, numerous plots in Jordan planned against U.S. and Western targets. Those are thwarted by U.S. and Jordanian intelligence. You've got the attack on the USS Sullivan's, U.S. Navy warship in Yemen, except al-Qaeda's boat sinks because it's overloaded. You've got the attack on LAX that's thwarted when Ahmed Rassam comes across the northern border and alert border protection customs officials see something's wrong and they arrest him at the border. And you have the successful Taliban hijacking of an Indian Airlines aircraft. Well, if we go back to the USS Sullivan's attack, or the planned attack in 1999, we know that they came back, and in October 2000, the USS Cole was hit in the port in Yemen. So what have I demonstrated? What does history tell us? What's the story tell us? And why are they doing what they're doing? Well, they tell us. They stand in the street with signs and say, we want Sharia. Sharia will dominate the world. They want Allah's law, not man's law. Remember when a jihadi, a Muslim, not a terrorist, a Muslim jihadi plowed a rental truck over people on a bike path in New York and killed 8 people? Well, when he was standing in federal court, this is what he said. I care about Allah and the holy war being waged by the Islamic State. The Islamic State is not fighting for land or for oil. They have one purpose. They're fighting to impose Sharia on the earth. So we know that al-Qaeda and the Islamic State say they're fighting to establish a caliphate under Sharia. And as I mentioned earlier, the Muslim Brotherhood bylaws say they were created to establish Allah's law in the land and Islamic State under Sharia. One vanilla message from the entire Muslim world. Let me just take it one step farther. Why would they teach it in U.S. Islamic schools that it's a duty of Muslims to wage jihad to establish an Islamic State under Sharia, and that the basis of the legal and political system is the Sharia of Allah? Because that's what Islam is. So why wouldn't they teach it? Finally, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, the largest voting bloc in the UN, the United Nations, made up of 57 member states, every Muslim nation on the planet. In 1990, they approved the Cairo Declaration on Human Rights in Islam, and 1993, they served it to the United Nations. And what does it say? Life is a God-given gift and is prohibited to take away life except for a Sharia-prescribed reason. There shall be no crime or punishment except as provided by Sharia. All the rights and freedoms stipulated in this declaration are subject to Islamic Sharia. Islamic Sharia is the only source of reference for the explanation or clarification of any of these articles in this declaration. So the entire Muslim world has told us that the way they relate human rights, the way they relate to non-Muslim human beings, to the non-Muslim world, is only through the filter of Sharia, which means non-Muslims must convert to Islam, must submit to Islam and pay the non-Muslim poll tax, or they must be killed. Homosexuals must be killed. People who commit adultery must be killed. People who leave Islam must be killed. Those who kill a Muslim for a non-Sharia reason, which is a terrorist in Islam, they must be killed according to Sharia. And so much more. That is how Islam relates to the West, to the non-Muslim world. And yet Islam obliges Muslims to lie to non-Muslims when the goal is obligatory, and it's obligatory to advance Islam. The reason I wrote my book, Islam's Deception, The Truth About Sharia, is because I want, understanding the threat wants you to understand this threat. It is critical that you understand this threat. And if you just read the first 10 or 15 pages of my book, you get the key question right between your eyes. How is it that what Muslim leaders tell U.S. leaders about Islam is exactly opposite of what Muslims are teaching their 11-year-old children in U.S. Islamic schools? So are the Muslims lying to their children when they're teaching Islam in their schools? No, they are not. Our leaders are being lied right to their face about what Islam is and how it's to be applied in the world. Understanding the threat stands ready to educate you through our many programs, law enforcement, military, first responders, intelligence professionals, National Guard, leaders, medical professionals, prosecutors, judges, and many others. The response from our training, for instance, our 3-day training for police and federal agents, is that at the end of 3 days, everyone in the room, including FBI counter-terrorist agents, will say 2 things. 1, we never knew this before we came in here, and 2, this is critical to protecting our local communities. Folks, we need to fight this war at the local, city, and county level, and we need you involved. Join us. Help us take the battle to the enemy and put freedom back on the offensive where it belongs. Go to understandingthethreat.com. Look at our capabilities page. Use our resources. Use our DVDs, our books, our streamed videos. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Parler at UTT. Follow us on Twitter at UTT_US. Share this with others. And if you're able, please donate to us. We are a corporation here in Texas. However, we have a nonprofit, Americans for America, supporting us. Text UTT, the number 4, USA to 56512. Join us and help us, again, put freedom back on the offensive where it belongs. Thank you, and God bless you.